Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we'll see my presentation in a moment, because we've prepared a little introductory set of slides here in order to shed some light on what we're talking about before we actually get started with our panel discussion. Now, we decided to do this in German, and because after all, we are talking about a topic here that is very German in terms of outreach. And many of the regions that we're talking about here also are related to the German tourist sport and what that tourist sport does. So what we'd like to do now is to say a word or two about how we see the situation in our federal state. So where are we with that presentation? Just briefly before I begin, why are we doing this? About a year ago, around this time, when the Tourism Forum here at ITB announced the latest figures of travel development in this country, it has become clear that quality in tourism will be center stage. Quality growth, compared to what we've seen before, which was rather quantity growth or future prospects that were just looking at the sheer size. Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, when it comes to quantity growth, has posted record numbers in those past years. Just today, we've heard that new records have been set in the travel industry, and people are celebrating those. But there's only so much you can do. These travel figures are finite because we're talking about Germany being a saturated market. And at the end of the day, people will decide where to go and where to travel, not because there's vacancies in rooms or hospitality in the hospitality industry, but people are looking for quality, and they want quality and better quality. They want to see a welcoming culture, good experience, etc. And only then will our guests decide where to go and when to do that.
Leider spielt die Technik uns heute hier gerade.
Unfortunately, technology is playing tricks on us here today. It used to work a moment ago.
Dann versuche ich ein bisschen noch in das Thema weiter einzusteigen.
Okay, maybe let me say a few more words before this presentation comes up. What is it that we've done in those past 2 years? As Mr. Bengsch said, we've been doing a quality campaign. Why is that? Back in 2016, at the Tourism Day, we have realized that something needs to be done because tourism demand in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania has almost hit a wall. It has developed really well in the past 25 years, but we have now come to a level where we need to create a better appeal. The market is saturated. We're going to see more consolidation in the travel industry market, and all the statistics that we have seen show us that, of course, there's only so many records that you can break, but that you need to come to a plateau or a dent in the upward trajectory. That's quite normal, and it will happen. And therefore, we need to think about how that can be fixed in the years to come. And now finally, there it is, my presentation. And with that wonderful slide, I'd like to welcome you yet again in the partner country of ITB, Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. And I think I can browse through some of those slides rather quickly. So what we talk about today is, as the tagline says, stars or TrustScore or TrustYou. We look at classification or certification systems, or perhaps it's the guest that's more important that we should put center stage. Now, let me say something about tourism as a business factor. There are a number of facts and figures here. Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania is surpassing many other German regions when it comes to the tourism revenues in the overall share of the economy. Almost 10% of value added comes from the tourism industry. It's more than twice as much as the average value in Germany. Now, what does that mean? It means that tourism in Mecklenburg is a part of the economy that we need to attach great attention to. Now, travel figures have been very positive across those past 20 years. Just last year, we've seen a small dip, 1.8% fewer visitors. Now, that harks back to what I said before about quantity rather than quality. Now, Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania is a very seasonal destination, pronounced seasonality throughout the year. Now, we'd like to flatten or even out that curve to move demand to the pre- or shoulder seasons in the spring and in the autumn in order to equalize demand throughout the entire year. So yes, as I said before, we are in a maturation phase, and that leads to more emphasis being put on improving the quality of our tourism industry. So again, as I said before, quantity growth is finite. We want to boost quality. We want to grow in several areas by making our guests happy. Now, what is quality about? And we asked this question a number of times today. Often people say quality is a match between supply and expectation. It doesn't mean that we should only operate five-star hotels across the country, good quality. But what is important, I think, is to meet expectations of visitors and offer something that for them is reasonable and plausible. So if people find something they find attractive and appealing, they'll be happy and more happy than they were before. Now, all of that is analyzed or has been communicated every year by the Sparkasse Tourism Barometer every year. And obviously, that barometer creates a ranking of numbers, of relative weighting of factors based on the TrustYou rating instrument.
Da sehen wir, dass Mecklenburg-Vorpommern im Jahr 2000.
So you can see that in 2012, Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania had a very good rate in the TrustScore system. We've got a beach hotel added here. It's got a TrustScore of 85 on a scale from 1 to 100. And it's actually increased by 3 points now several years later, but the figures have also increased for other federal states in Germany, but the league table order has changed. So the ratings are given in a somewhat unpredictable way. It's not enough to be number one in one particular year. There are changes from year to year. It doesn't mean that the situation will necessarily be the same in the following year. Now, we only believed this Sparkasse Savings Bank barometer to a certain extent, and we said we'd look into it in more detail for Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. Why is there shift? There's a relative shift involving the different destinations, and so we decided that we'd take a look at this ourselves to see what underpins it. And to look at this in more detail, we've got 8 destinations in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, which we add to the system, about 3,000 different kinds of service providers and around 500,000 evaluations. We decided to take a look at the detail to see why particular values are given, to learn from particular evaluations, and to see how you can draw lessons from these particular evaluations. We decided that we'd look at peripheral factors. Well, your hotel may be fantastic, the service may be very good, the customer may be happy. However, there can be a problem with the promenade outside the hotel, or the cycle path, or the situation in general in a particular location, then the hotelier will get a negative mark as well. Now, that may not be the hotelier's responsibility. We need to help motivate them to change these problematic points and to improve them. There's the question of destination quality that plays a key role. We wanted to look at room for improvement on this front. We'll be talking about destination quality in more detail in a moment. Looking at destination quality analyses, you can see how the various destinations in our federal state are doing in terms of comparison across the entire federal state and across the entire country. So that was our situation on the evaluations. So you have what's on offer and the expectations of the guests. You have to make sure that those tally. What can be done on the supply side? We took a look at the classification systems that exist in our federal state, and we tried to compare these one with another. So there's the tourist information system, service quality for Germany, and we wondered whether there were significant comparisons between the regions, between the German federal states, and indeed between the various different segments. In November 2017, we had a tourism day, and we realized that, as a matter of fact, evaluations and classification systems are very important in determining the reputation of the various establishments on the market. We also developed our own classification system. That is the audited quality for family holidays in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. We've got around 100 establishments which have certification for family holidays. We looked at whether there are dependencies, and all of the companies that dealt with this, and in the best case scenario, in a classification system, they actually obtain better guest evaluations than those which are not involved in this kind of quality management system. We didn't leave it at that either. We said we wanted to honour these achievements and to send out a clear message. We wanted to demonstrate that it's really worth investing in quality. For that reason, we established a special quality award for Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, and we awarded that last year to the destination Fischland, das Zingst. But it's not enough just to say, well, you're the best, you don't need to do anything more. We wanted to really pay tribute to what's been achieved. And as you can see here in the third line of this slide, we wanted to focus on how to create more attention and create pressure to act as well. We discuss with our tourist destinations. They come to us as the Federal State Association. They all come along to us and say, what can we do to ensure that we're as good as the winners, as people in Fischland, das Zingst? And that's meant that we're able to focus much more on quality. We have 2,900 different service providers, but we want to include all of them in the future, right across the entire federal state. But that's not all. We also need to look at those things which are somewhat intangible. Aspects that are not so easy to grasp. We need to ask guests, for example, what they expect and what their views are on certain aspects of our federal state. They're not always terribly clearly articulated. Sometimes guests say, oh, it's not great, it could be better. Those are the kind of statements we have to address. But the devil is in the detail, and it's those details that we want to improve so we can focus on making improvements where improvements are needed. And we need to stipulate who is responsible for doing this. We're going to develop a quality network in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. The world of politics will be involved in this. We want to set the course to move in the right direction politically and financially. We need quality managers, quality rangers, I've called them, who are really quite tough and can get the message across to those on the spot, on the very local level and regionally too, so that people can really act on the spot. We face a whole host of challenges. It's not just about guests giving stars to hotels and holiday flats, but there's a plethora of different quality labels, not just in the accommodation sector, but right across the board: POE, leisure facilities, and other amenities. We need to get to work on that and to ensure sustainability. We also need to ensure that we have a long-term, steady foundation to solve these problems and to get all of these quality management issues rolled into one and resolved. And our quality strategy is part of our tourism concept for 2018. This is a focal point, not just for our federal state, but right across Germany. I'm looking forward to our discussion now. The broad topic is STARS or TrustYou, but I would change that title to STARS and TrustYou, and a whole host of other factors too, which we'll be discussing, I'm sure, in a moment.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Machur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Machur. Now, do stay up here with me. I'd like to kick off ladies first. Ms. Gilles, CEO of the German Tourism Association. Do please come up. Mühlen Dicken from Project M and Michael Menzel, Chief Revenue Officer. Sorry, I do apologize, says the speaker. So, welcome. Now, we've talked a great deal about quality. Mr. Machur filled us in. It's an issue of concern to all of us. We're consultants, and we've known all about this topic for quite some time. What do you think has changed over the last few years? Well, Mr. Machur gave a very interesting depiction of that. We started off with a hotel classification system that helped guests to take decisions. And then there were all kinds of different classifications, DTV, STAR system from the German Tourism Association. That really turned into a jungle. It wasn't at all possible for tourists to find their way through that jungle any longer. And then evaluation portals developed, drawing on guest experiences. One could identify what's actually happening on the spot and how you might experience it yourself when you went to that destination, partly through TrustYou, partly through pulling all of the different evaluations into one figure in the form of a trust score. You could see how positive it is in that particular destination. It's much broader than just, for example, 1 star. You'll see from my question that I wanted to make the discussion more general. What Mecklenburg-Vorpommern has done is something that's relevant for all of us right across Germany. We all face the same problems. You said that it really turned into a jungle of evaluations. If I can pick up on that metaphor. You also have in the middle of that jungle the DTV, the German Tourism Association's qualification system for hotels and flats and so on, and other holiday rents. What's your view? Well, yes, it all has quite a lot of history to it. It's the 25th year of that system now. It all started in the 1990s. Some feel that it's getting a little dated. Like almost all systems, the number of certified establishments has dropped slightly. We don't know exactly how the market looks. There's no obligation to register holiday rentals or holiday flats. There are some studies which offer us a basis. There was the presentation of the tourism barometer. I was there. It's quite astonishing to look at the distinct classification systems. Guests have a lot more confidence in that than in the evaluation portals, but they're not used so much. They're not so familiar. That is really the key challenge, to recognize and emphasize the value of these systems. That's also important for firms because sometimes they're bombarded with labels, sometimes even regional labels. It'd be better to have a more simplified evaluation system. We have very complex systems right across the board. German complexity, 180 criteria, 17 pages long. That's what's checked. It generally takes 45 minutes to an hour. German thoroughness, that's the way that the other systems work as well. Sometimes that's all a bit much for the firms, especially the smaller ones. So we really need to be self-critical and think about how we can remove some of the complexity from that system. We need to enhance the visibility as well on platforms too. I think we are moving in the right direction. There are small platforms for holiday flats. We've got nearly all of them on board. When it comes to the larger ones, it's more problematic when you're thinking about working with national certification systems and persuading them to take those on board. What's important is that we're working in a sector which is, in a sense, semi-professional. On the one hand, you have very professional hotels and also professional facilities, leisure amenities, for example. There are a lot of small and very small firms. They need advice. I think we do a great deal on that front, all of us working together. I'll come back to some of those points in a moment, but thank you for that. Mr. Menzel, once again, the jungle metaphor. That's an excellent buzzword. We now have guest evaluations, but there's a real jungle there as well. Different rating systems, different evaluations, different establishments. Who helps? TrustYou perhaps helps. Maybe you could say a few words about how it works, because some of those with us this afternoon may not know exactly how this TrustScore functions and what the various different components in it are. Well, what we do is that we go along to an accommodation form, hotel or whatever. We bring together all of the different evaluation systems, and we crawl or scrape the data from those and put that data into our database. We've developed a system over the past 2 years or so that allows us to weight every evaluation and every single sentence. That allows us to filter out the mood from those evaluations and feed that into analytic tools. So we standardize the written language. We filter the excessive emotion, which you sometimes find in these texts, and take that out and then say, well, okay, this is a very good hotel. We also pick up on the various different idioms, the typical phrases that are found in different countries. For example, in Japan, nobody would ever say that a hotel was bad, but they might say that the hotel across the street looked better and has better quality than the one where one stayed oneself. And these kinds of phrases, of turns of phrase, of ways of speaking, are filtered into our systems that we can function worldwide and evaluate worldwide and have all of this expressed as a score. The score itself is the sum of all individual scores from the various different portals. It's not aggregated through the portal, so if you have 8.9 in Booking.com, that's not the figure which we take. What we do is we take every single evaluation that led to the 8.9, and we then weight those so that every evaluation has a distinct weighting irrespective of its source. We use statistical methods to weight that. For example, more recent evaluations have a higher weighting, same for seasonality as well. Thank you. That's really fascinating. And Ms. Gilles touched upon this just a moment ago, this apparent contradiction. At the information and booking phase, guests want information security and transparency. They want to be able to make a really fantastic booking and to have a great holiday, but there's a contradiction that you mentioned earlier. Actually, and this is something that we found in our analyses, there was a representative survey of the Germans as the basis for that. The German populace said, yes, we do trust classifications, and that means you think they trust the German Tourism Association system or other classification systems, but when it comes to actually booking, we look at the specific evaluations, and that seems to be a contradiction. You talked about visibility before, but let me ask everybody, how can we overcome this specific contradiction? Who'd like to break the ice? Mr. Machur. Well, it's quite straightforward. There aren't so many classified establishments. So if you have a list of 100 establishments, there'll be stars that crop up here and there, but the guests might feel there's something more somewhere else, and then they'll go and look elsewhere. In every hit list, you have the same evaluation. And of course, people have a look at what others write, what your neighbour writes. We know at the ITB some people really go over the top. After the 50th positive evaluation in the list, they still think there must be a bad one somewhere, and the guest wants to be able to exclude the possibility that it's bad. That people want to be really, really certain that they've booked a good hotel and that they've managed to find their way through this whole tangle of classifications and evaluations. Some people really overdo it. We need to do something against that as well to combat this so that we don't get a poor evaluation because there are outliers. I mean, every single five-star hotel has had a bad evaluation here, there, or somewhere else. For example, if what's on offer does not tally with the expectations of the guests, you get bad evaluations. Even if everything is fine in the hotel, so the hoteliers need to think about whether they should change their marketing. For example, perhaps stating what you don't have so that guests are not disappointed. There's a great deal of scope to act. Some people also get used to labels. You find this in the retail trade. You find this on food as well. For example, there's national labels and international labels, but the interest sort of wears out. We know that. We're familiar with it. It's fine. And if they're official certifications, such as hotel classification systems, we say, good, that's fine. However, the really topical, up-to-date information comes from the evaluation. At the end of the day, you've got 3 stars or something similar, or a quality label. When it comes to an evaluation, you can really read a text. You find out things that the 3 stars won't tell you. Is it close to the beach? Is the furniture really modern? Is the style interesting? So the evaluation gives you more information. It's more individual, so it's only an apparent contradiction. We know that guests look at both. Airbnb, for example, has the particularly good flats and houses checked. I mean, they wouldn't have to do that if you could rely on this in terms of community reports, if you could rely on those reports always being completely reliable. So that's an extra sign of quality for the Airbnb establishments. And I think both make sense, particularly when you combine them. You talked earlier about visibility. In a sense, that was our conclusion. Whether that's correct or not is something that you can confirm, I would say. When it comes to booking, of course, you may focus more on evaluation. That can be a problem because you can't always see on the booking platform what kind of classification it's got. Is it one that is classified by the Biking Association? You also talked about the smaller booking platforms, but not, for example, Booking.com and others. Well, the specialized booking platforms where the holiday flats are available, the relevant platforms. We need to ensure that we can have a secure and positive booking experience online. We check up on that too. And then there's the international topic of the international offers. Now, they have their own star systems or watering cans or stars or suns, whatever, generally rating from 1 to 5. That is fairly international. Customers are familiar with that. It's slightly different at Thomas Cook and TUI, but customers are aware that there are categories. They're used to that. In the first step, the customer relies on that and then has a look at Google Maps to see exactly where it is. Is it on a main road? Might it be noisy? And then, yes, we'll check up on the evaluations, maybe not hundreds of them, but certainly a few. And the purchasing decision at the end of the day is influenced by a whole spectrum of different factors, and that's a positive thing. I'd be bold enough to say that trust in evaluations is going to increase. We started off with evaluations. They had, for example, at Amazon, people in India writing the evaluations, but the evaluation portals now are seeking to ensure that the verified evaluations are at the top of the list to create more trust, to ensure that guests do have more confidence in the system. I think that the brand value is very important. DeHoga, for example, you have to think about how the DeHoga star classification works. Holiday TripAdvisor booking, everyone knows what that signifies. You know that there are these scales that run from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Market penetration is relevant. We're thinking about the end users as well. And that's a relevant parameter for the evaluation platforms. TripAdvisor and Holiday Check. People have decided to vote on their own initiative, but as a firm, I'm really interested in demand-side implementation. You can get a code that gives, if you use the code, you're using something that's really called for by the industry, but neglecting the demand side is absolutely fatal, because ultimately nobody will come to your business, whether you're thinking of a hotel or any other kind of sector. When it comes to accommodation, I'd say we have the most appraisals worldwide. It is a huge segment, but I don't think there is a contradiction. For all of us, we're focusing on the market. We're not conditioning guests to say, well, that's the way we are, we can't do any different. We're picking up on an empathetic approach, looking at the guest who's been there and picking up on what they've said to take account of that in our marketing, because we've seen there have been hundreds of people who've been there who are satisfied with the accommodation. Coming back to the LTO, LMO, whatever you want to call them, there's a very broad spectrum structurally. Mr. Machur, you talked about this before. We identified that on the one hand you're looking at classification. If you engage with that as a firm or with quality management measures, you have a better appraisal in the portals, and that's statistically significant. Is that perhaps because, as a firm, you're looking at quality? Then you end up with a better evaluation in the portals. Now, you, I believe, Ms. Gilles, showed in the context of a study that holiday flats, which have better evaluations, are better at maintaining their prices. So in a sense, it's a win-win measure with classification and this sort of initiative from peers. Companies really need to look at this, but they don't. What do you do to ensure that they do and that they get going on this front? I read something very interesting on this yesterday. If you who actually classifies? Is it the guest? Is it an association such as DeHoga, the Hotel and Restaurant Association? Actually, you could say that it's the guest who does this through the evaluations, providing information as to how their stay functions. But the significance of a classification in this context has shifted somewhat. And as the tourism industry, we focus on a means to an end, using classification to educate people about what's available. For example, the semi-professional people renting out flats. I get complaints sometimes, and it really makes your hair stand on end. You'd think it wouldn't be possible that this kind of thing even still existed today. The guests have, of course, classified that quite rightly, but the message hasn't quite got across to whoever's letting out this flat or offering this service, and we, as the tourism industry, need to provide a helping hand. There's the training aspect. There's an educational aspect. That's much more significant in a way than the stars that you have stuck in the window of your shop or restaurant or hotel. Access to these classification systems must be made as straightforward as possible for those providing services. That relates to the effort that involves for us as well. We need inspectors, we need workshops, we need material, we need to get in touch with service providers. Ultimately, we also need to demonstrate to them that what they do will be successful. We need to do this not simply as part of a classification, we need to do this in terms of the quality labels as well, so that it's important for the service provider to know that the label will still exist in 5 or 10 years, that it has a long-term impact too. Often our focus is on a project-driven approach. Travel for all. Just by way of example, we have the Day of Barrier-Free Travel at the ITB as well. This is enormously significant for us, but it's hugely time-consuming. It takes hours to appraise and evaluate. We want to make sure that it can all be verified and that it's honest and transparent. It's a lot of effort. And we've only got a very small percentage of classified establishments. Imagine you say you want to have 80% of all the establishments on your list. Well, how are you going to manage that? I don't know where to get the staff from to do that. Perhaps from the perspective of both of you, the role of the DMOs, can you tell us a little bit about what you think they will play in the future? What role should they play? Well, they've done a great deal over the last few years. There's one reason why we're at the current level. In certain firms, there is still a great deal to be done. Who deals with the complaints management, for example? Well, it's actually the DMOs, the tourist information on the spot. But we're dealing with independent businesses and entrepreneurs here. Sometimes the message falls on fertile ground, but not always. We've realized that it's about more than just awarding stars to accommodation. There's a question of service quality, a new kind of currency in tourism. Is it always good for a destination to have more and more overnight stays? Think too about the question of staff with good employment conditions, well paid. There's also the question of a good range of leisure activities on offer, things you can do when it's raining, for example. All of that is part and parcel of what good tourism means. It's not just the question of higher and higher figures. There's a question of value added for as many people as possible. Local populace saying that tourism is an important topic for us, that we want to have tourists and tourists don't bother us. So we're thinking about different parameters. We're measuring different elements, but quality is the real underpinning, because if you don't have quality management and hardware and software and such like as well on that front, you can't do anything on the tourism front. And DMOs is something like a competence centre for quality, not just infrastructure, but also service quality, communication quality. How do you get the information across to the guest? Infrastructure quality, and so on and so forth. The quality of the experience as well. That's perhaps what persuaded the guest to come to that destination, is what means that the guest will be satisfied when they go back home as well. And the DMO needs to promote that, constituting a competence centre and being a contact point for the various different tourist firms. We often talk about these firms or businesses. It's a bit of a buzzword, but the overall experience on the spot is relevant. We need to take an integrated approach. Mobility on the spot. Does the public transport system work well? Are there certain time periods where the system is really under strain? What's the situation in terms of leisure activities? Is there a focus on sustainability? Quality is a very general buzzword, but it's a very broad, overarching concept, and it's also very individual. It varies from place to place. For guests, I think the overall experience is crucial. You can see that when you look at the evaluations. People are supposed to evaluate a particular business, but they nonetheless comment on the general surroundings, whether there's a good signage, whether the opening hours are too long or too short. There's more and more of an emphasis on the big picture, on the overall experience. So we need to really have a much broader perspective when we think about quality. Yes, it's the entire service chain. Mr. Menzel, question for you. The entire service chain. Currently, you're focusing on accommodation. I know that. I know it's a popular question, but I really do have to put this question. What about other businesses? You could have, for example, destination evaluation online at some point in time, I imagine. Well, we're looking primarily at accommodation providers. We're going to focus more on the gastronomy side of things, on hotels, restaurants, bars. We depend upon the sources of data that are available to us. There are some things you can do purely in terms of the data. We have selected destinations who are prepared to pay us sufficiently for that. We can't do it across the board. Think about the kind of phrases that people write about a destination. They're not so different than if you're talking about an accommodation. It could be a wonderful, or if you're even talking about a wine, it could be a wonderful glass of wine, it could be a wonderful hotel. The adjectives used, and the verbs are very similar. Sometimes the nouns change, sometimes there are specific verbs, but the basic syntax is very similar, so we could do it. There's also an economical risk as well to just do it without being paid for it. We're not so well set up that we'd be able to do that just for the sake of it. And think about the sources where you've got 5,000 evaluations, say, for the Eiffel Tower and 2 for a small museum around the corner. So that's tricky. We can do it on a one-off basis. There's guest card as well. There are also these destinations which have very high volumes of tourists. But smaller service providers, I don't know, a small boat rental company has only got 3 evaluations. That's a bit more problematic. And of course, you want to make sure that this is valid. To get statistical validity is also tricky. If you're looking at comparing this with, say, 100,000 different canoe rental companies, now we're almost at the end of this, just looking to the future. Let me say a few words. And I'm actually going to look to the future. That's exactly what we're concerned with. We've already talked about quality, and it's so far been as if quality always means the quality of the hotel accommodation. It's linked to the overnight stays. But as we all know, there are many, many more factors that influence how guests perceive quality in a destination. We want to measure those, and we want to render them comparable. There has to be some way or another to grasp that, but it might be possible for us to look, for example, at this boat rental company with 3 evaluations, not use that as a parameter for benchmarking right across Germany, because it wouldn't work in statistical terms. But we'll take the boat rental company and look at the evaluations and say, well, why don't you come around and have a chat with us in private? These 3 evaluations could be better. And maybe it's a very oversimple evaluation, but it's helpful to look at the evaluations to carry out one's own analyses. It's not just a question of a trust score of 85. We want to know why they have a trust score of 85, what the guests say about it. The individual points of criticism as well, because then the service provider, whether it's somebody who's renting out canoes or doing something else, they can identify their shortcoming and seek to overcome it. Then there's the question of the cycle path. Right outside of my hotel, it gets very poor quality ratings. But maybe I can go and have a word in the mayor's ear and say, well, hang on, you mean that I'm getting very bad quality ratings because you don't take good care of that cycle path? That could be very helpful when we're looking at the content of hotels and other accommodations. We want to look at this on a very broad basis as well. There's around 5,000 POEs in our database, and that is something very important, looking at the points of interest right across our entire tourist region. Now, the basic question was evaluation. or TrustScore, TrustYou, or indeed stars? And I think this is a question that we all agree is one that you should answer with, well, it should be an and rather than an or. We'll need both in the future. Perhaps very briefly, the last round, 3 sentences. No, 2 sentences from each of you. Keep it short. What can we say to Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania? What kind of take-home message can we give them?
Auf den Weg geben in die Zukunft.
So what can they do in the future? Yeah, learn everything, so do everything. I'm totally convinced that they're on the right path, actually. So they have an integrated view of quality, and they have integrated that aspect, and they are also very well positioned in terms of measuring the parameters, not only to generate quality, but also to monitor and also prove it. So they were very well positioned. Can I say something very practical? So you have wonderful plants and wonderful nature, so wonderful canoe rentals, but what I don't really see there is wonderful restaurants. I mean, you need to have a closer look, because that's exactly what our guests do. So we sometimes hover above a location just like a drone, but when you are right in the middle of everything, then you know that how difficult it is to offer a very good product where everything works. So in a region where you don't have a lot of tourists, where it's in Ahrensborn and so, for example, but to have a general approach to see what you need to do across the region. So Peine is just one example. So I mean, don't take it with a grain of salt. So yes, well, I don't take it too personally. So of course you need to look at the individual location. So. Right, the TrustScore, of course, is some type of guidelines, because it uses a lot of sources. People want to have some type of guideline, and they want to give their own opinion. And I'm a fan of the muscle pyramid, so that you need to first have a good basis and then take things from there. And this is what we're doing. This is our product. Let me look at my watch. So it is 10 minutes to 6. Thank you very much for sticking it out here, staying with us for such a long time, and for listening so closely to us, and staying with us during the last session of today's event on the German Tourism Forum. And I also would like to thank you on behalf of Mr. Machur, so on behalf of the partnering countries, that he helped us organize this event this afternoon, and they are the sponsors and also hosts and organizers for these types of events as a partner country. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the ITB and the evening. Bye-bye.